So when we look at this objective of building a community of people who would implement mindfulness-based organizational education in the context that they are working in, what I just said is that there would be coaching, mentoring, help to do this. Why are we so happy, Mark, that you developed this? Why are we so confident that what you developed is working? Well, for one, some of us here have tested already, have looked at your program, have been impressed by it, but it's also your history. And when I first read about your metaphors of the trout and how they find different food on different levels, I thought, who is this person who talks about trouts when we are talking about mindfulness? But then I found out that your first profession was in sustainability, in fishery and wastewater. So it was not strange anymore. Corinne just talked about puppets, and you wanted us to be the puppeteer instead of the puppets on the string. Let's use our metaphors to incorporate this. Mark, you've also been very instrumental in the coming to life of the Oxford Mindfulness Centre. You've been very instrumental in creating new venues there, new possibilities of also addressing people who would maybe not in the first place have been trained. You have very early on, I think 12 years ago already, started to work on mindfulness in the workplace. You worked with a colleague, you prepared the spin-off of the Oxford Mindfulness Centre. You worked with Juliet Adams. Now, if that all was not enough to already foreshadow what kind of program you would develop, well, tonight, we all have the chance to listen to you yourself and to connect and be able to take it from here and implement it in practice. I wholeheartedly invite you to take the floor. I know that you want to share maybe 3 slides. Whenever you are ready, please let me know what you want to do first. And the main thing would be help us understand what's the difference between a business consultant being trained as mindfulness teacher going into an organization and a person being trained in MBOE going to an organization.
Well, first of all, it's lovely to be here and thank you so much for inviting me. It's just a real pleasure to talk to you all about, I guess, the work that I've been doing, and really Katharina mentioned my background, and coming from that, really it's a desire to bring what I had experienced and learnt from being interested in Buddhism into a social change process, rather than coming at it from a stress reduction or therapeutic intention. But it made sense to, when the opportunity arose, to work to support the development of the Oxford Mindfulness Centre, because I saw that as a bridge to bringing contemplative practice, broadly speaking, from a Western Buddhist influence into wider society. But I was always looking for ways of adapting that approach to something that had more of a broader set of qualities that made it feel something that was more integrated in a modern way, in a contemporary way, that brought Buddhist understanding to a contemporary audience in society to transform society, rather than it being, as I said, an approach to deal with stress and mental illness, because I felt that mental illness or mental health problems, the rising rates of mental health problems, are really just an expression of a deeper systemic problem that was also being expressed in patterns of unsustainable resource use. So I felt the two things were linked, and I thought that really we needed to look at some systemic way of changing the way we see ourselves, the way we relate to each other, the way we build society, the motivations in society, our sense of self, and the way we relate to the environment as well. So I felt that, so that was my objective, if you like, building a thoroughly contemporary understanding and practice of what Buddhists would call Dhamma or Dharma. And really, that is something that fits into a biological understanding, an ecosystems understanding of how the world works, how things are interconnected, how I think there's a very close set of understandings that comes out of that sort of systems biological approach, the way human organizations work, and the way change actually happens. I mean, one of the things that I came to the conclusion when I was studying or involved with environmental work was that whenever we try and do something, we try and set ourselves a goal, we look at policy, we look at awareness raising, we look at regulation, there always seem to be these unintended consequences, and very little actually changes. And so often there are sort of unintended negative consequences that we haven't really factored in, that seem to make progress very slow. So that's why I felt that there needed to be something that went deeper into society. And really, that's where I started looking at how a biologist might look at the way the understanding of Dhamma fitted into a modern social environment, looking at evolutionary psychology, beginning to understand more about sort of sociology and organizational psychology as I developed this interest. And historically, I got the opportunity to gain the opportunity to practice teaching and developing my understanding of how that worked as an adaptation of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy with the self-help book of the short version of Mindfulness, a Practical Guide to Finding Peace in the Frantic World. And I brought to it experience that I'd had in workplace training and also teaching English as a foreign language. So there were sort of classroom teaching skills that I brought to trying to apply a cognitive understanding of mindfulness in an organization where people are not entering the program specifically in the way that they would go through a series of agreements and understanding if they were being triaged through a therapeutic system in a health service. So it requires a great deal of different approaches to engage and the interest and get people to agree to engage in the process of starting to develop a mindfulness meditation practice, educational elements to explain what was happening and why it was happening and what that people were doing, as well as a social process of workshop activities that made people feel at ease within a group. And it was those learnings that then really set me on the path of thinking about how to build this into a more of an organizational change approach. And I got the opportunity to do that in a National Health Service hospital and run a trial. And that, some really nice results came out of that. One of the first studies that looked at a workplace type measure, self-report measure that comes from self-determination theory that looks at 3 qualities of autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So it was very much shifting the emphasis of mindfulness of our own process to mindfulness of how we create a sense of self in relationship to others, and how we build a sense of cohesion and, if you like, and a term that's become widely talked about, social safety or psychological safety within a group, and begin to identify with that group and work together to get things done. At this point, it might be useful just to show you 2 or 3 slides to give you well, that's 4 slides I've put together, just a visual picture of the sort of core ideas and objectives of where I'm going with this. And I'm calling this broadly as a subject of social mindfulness. And if you like, the mindfulness-based organizational education program is one expression of that, in which the ideas were tested and proven, in the field. So social mindfulness is like the principle, and mindfulness-based organizational education is the proof of principle. So Katharina, can you give me co-host power?
I did.
Okay, great. So you can see on this picture, social mindfulness, pyramid of change. There are 3 different levels that I'm talking about with social mindfulness and the MBOE program. There's the group level, a relational level, and the individual level. I think there's been a number of innovations over the last 4 or 5 years looking at applying individual mindfulness with the relational aspect in conversations. And conversations are very much understood from an organizational perspective as being the processes which build an organization. I've added onto that really a 3rd level, which is the idea of the whole group, the culture, into explicitly within the training model itself and the objectives of the training model. So it's very much presenting itself as an organizational intervention. Team building, yes, but it's about how to change culture within an organization. So there's a shift in language and a shift in intention behind the whole program that is part of something that really needs to be explored with a potential client organization or a community. So yes, it's community development in the end. It's community development in an organization or in the community itself. So it can be applied to any area, really. Its key function is in a group of people that can change culture and then have an impact through that. Doesn't mean that groups of people that are not in an existing sort of network can't do the program. They can do the program, but the impact is not going to be the same, because it's not a group level process that's taking place. So I've just put 3 different versions of the same triangle of the pyramid of change here. And if you look at the red layer, they're very much related to individual mindfulness. The green layer are very much related to this sort of relational aspect that builds out of communication and bringing awareness to the way we relate to each other. And from a Dharma point of view, this is bringing into the practice a specific development of understanding of how we construct a sense of self in relationship to others, and how the program itself is building the tools to enable people to see how this sense of self is a changing thing rather than it being a fixed thing. So that's the key kind of insight that comes out of the process, the education, the practice of the relational aspect of mindfulness. And then there are the group level things to do with culture, to do with belonging to a group, a sense of being part of a group, identifying with a group, a culture, an organization or a team, being inclusive, gaining the value of diversity and the different things that different people can bring from different backgrounds to a collective activity. And that's where we get the group mind emerging. People are talking about collective intelligence in how mindfulness impacts collective intelligence in a group. And I see the group very much as an analog of a collection of individual minds, and the individual mind being a collection of sub-identities or sub-processes. And it's a model of the human mind that is one that's relational rather than on an individual cognitive level. So it's saying that mind itself is a process of sensing, perceiving, cognizing, and acting. It's really closely related to the ideas of Francisco Varela of inaction, and it's a mindfulness-based program that is really built to deliver a practical understanding of what Varela is talking about with inaction. If anybody's come across that, I'd highly recommend you look at that to gain a deeper understanding of how this approach is working. And then to make it work in the workplace, then you need to be able to have ways of translating these ideas into the language of the culture of the organization that you might be working with. So in practice, this is what the actual elements of the MBOE program are built on. And again, the MBOE program is like a specific case where a structured program is designed to develop these capacities. You may notice, if you come from a Dharma-based background, that there are three aspects to this, and these three aspects are a kind of summary of the three divisions of the Eightfold Path. You've got the meditation or concentration and mindfulness elements in the mindfulness meditation element, and that's very much related to existing understandings or existing therapeutic-based, 8-week-based mindfulness programs. There's a sense of relatedness, which I think is very much related to the idea of ethics, in that when we understand others, we're more likely to, and we feel that we are similar to others, or we have a similar humanness to others. This is going to naturally give us a rationale or reasoning for behaving in ethical ways to others. And then there's the insight area, which in the MBOE program is as I've mentioned, specifically looking at the way we create a sense of self in relationship to others, and how we create a sense of other, and how othering arises, and how out of othering processes, what the real challenge, one of the biggest challenges in organizations today is these issues of inclusion that are very hard to deal with, because the way we create a sense of self and other is very much is an unconscious process. Implicit bias is very difficult to see, because it is an unconscious process. And until we start applying mindfulness to understand the way we actually construct a sense of self, and the way we construct a sense of other in different contexts with different emotional qualities, and how that changes the internal narrative of self and other, I don't think we're ever going to be in a position where we can actually begin to become consciously aware of these implicit bias processes that cause so much problem, particularly in increasingly diverse organizations and communities. There are three elements that fit in with that, which are key to the actual practice, which overlap of these three areas of insight, sense of relatedness, and mindfulness meditation. Developing active listening skills is really powerful, hugely powerful. And the more we can inform that by mindfulness meditation practice through primarily becoming consciously aware of feeling processes, as well as what would, from a cognitive perspective, be described as, metacognition, seeing our thoughts arising, but focusing on the body-based sensory experience that's taking place, rather than trying to respond to what we hear from others in terms of giving advice or problem solving another's problem. I think there's an interesting, something that occurred to me was that the fundamental need of a human being is belonging in a group. And the fundamental fear of a human being is rejection from the group. And when someone comes with a challenge or a difficulty or some kind of problem to another, what they're really looking for is for the other person that is listening to them, potentially someone that has power and influence in that group, to say, okay, it's all right that you have these difficulties, but it's not a problem to me. And if it's not a problem to me, it's not a problem. There's no fear of your rejection. And maybe things will work out, maybe things will change, but maybe that will happen. But the first step is this, bringing that qualities of acceptance of our own experience, non-judgmental acceptance of our own experience into the relational context, where it becomes a non-judgmental acceptance of another's uncomfortable experience. And I think that has a very powerful impact in making people, in building this sense of social safety. And out of that, then things can change, intuitive solutions arise, and solutions arise naturally out of what I'm calling the group mind here, the process of all the different contributions of narratives, of behaviors, of experience that come out of a group of people that feel safe together and connected together and belong together. I put in the circles interconnecting sense of relatedness and insight, really applying curiosity about the way we think and feel. That's intrinsic to the mindfulness practice as an individual practice, but we're bringing this into the relational sphere and consciously learning from it to develop insights that begin to show us how our sense of self changes in different emotional contexts, and how those emotional qualities or feeling qualities of experience inform that sense of self. So that's developing the insight element into understanding the way our sense of self arises and the way we create a sense of other. And then a key aspect of bringing mindfulness to that insight area is developing language. And it's really the capacity to develop language to describe our experience that is the foundation of a conceptual framework that underpins insight itself, the wisdom that insight is, and the insight that we have into the way things happen. So nearly all of these elements exist within a standard, or the way programs like mindfulness-based cognitive therapy have evolved, and how they've been adapted from mindfulness-based stress reduction. I'm just really focusing the teaching process to make these explicit and exploit those relational elements and those theoretical elements that are represented by all of these different aspects of what I'm describing social mindfulness. It's just more explicit. And the weight of the teaching model moves from being, if you like, if we had this as an MBSR or MBCT course, the red circle would be much bigger than either the other two circles. But in this approach, I've put them all as equal size. It's possible, I could even argue that the red circle is the smallest circle out of all of these three, and the green circle might be the biggest one. And I actually think that the green circle is the one where the biggest changes take place in a group, and this becomes a sort of social a culture that then supports the development of the other two circles. I quite often like to refer to the conversation between Ananda and the Buddha, where Ananda asks the Buddha, surely, Lord, honorable friendship is half of the path. And the Buddha says to Ananda, don't say that. Honorable friendship is the whole of the path. And because it's through honorable friendship that all of the qualities of enlightenment can be learnt through that relationship of those relationships of honorable friendship. So it's really trying to establish that in a group as the foundation of the approach through modern teaching and training and classroom type approaches that would be entirely familiar to most people in contemporary society.
Mark, do you want to present before you take questions, or can we interfere in?
I've only got like a couple of quick slides, so
okay,
a couple more slides that are very quick.
We can return to this one then later.
Okay, yes, very well. So I've talked about most of these things, just summarizing what I think are the benefits of this approach. Sort of key ideas, and these ideas are the kind of things that you can talk about, I think, to a client. They're the kind of things that make sense to an organization. Social safety, as I mentioned, a really important developing idea. All of these elements need to come together for an organization or a group of people to work cohesively for a collective goal. So why do we need to do it in groups? Because this is how social change takes place. And if you look at traditional culture, the renunciate community or the community of practice, whatever you want to call it, they support each other in a close network. It could be in a Christian context, in a community of a monastery or a nunnery. They have links with the lay community. In this context, I'm saying the community of practice has networks into wider society and how they interact with wider society. And then there's the impact itself in wider society. I think we need to look at this. This perhaps is the biggest missing link in what we are trying to achieve if we're mindfulness teachers seeking to have a wider impact on society, and that is community of practice, supporting each other, connecting with each other. And what that really means down the line is place, a place where people meet. It builds an analog of what we all recognize from traditional cultures or traditional religious approaches. There are the places where this takes place, and they are nested within community, and this has a wider impact on society. So just the one point here, a nice study, a tipping point is reached when there's a critical mass of 25% of any group that is committed to change in that group. And this experiment was done with an almost meaningless objective of asking people, a small group of Confederates in a group to correct somebody's use of a name. Say, for the sake of argument, one individual is known as John, and it takes up to 25% of members of that group to correct others using that name, John, to say William, and to say, no, his name's not John, it's William, to actually change the whole behavior of that group. The study was looking at what does it take to change sexist behavior, sexist language in an organization. And that's a lot more related to identity and much more emotional in significance, but just with something that's completely neutral, it still took 25%. This is why community of practice is so important. And that is my conclusion. So I'll stop the share unless you want to go back to any of those slides at any particular stage. Perhaps it's a good point to take questions, if there are any at this stage.
Yes.
Hello.
Yeah, can I ask a question, please,
Yes.
Mark? On at your second slide, in the middle, there is a white spot and it doesn't have any wordings. So I was wondering what's in the middle?
Well, I think you could put a lot of things, and I decided not to put anything in there. I think in actual fact, in the class, because of the process, for the sake of argument, when people are beginning to understand and see how their sense of self is lost when they feel safe in practice, that's where we get, where the understandings are developing, where mindfulness meditation practice is developing, an understanding of the qualities of relatedness, connection with others. We get a natural emergence of a culture which could be defined by understanding and compassion. These become a kind of metaphysical level of meaning that is has a symbolic reference that's very hard to start talking about in a secular context until it starts to emerge. And these are the qualities that, from a traditional point of view, are deified as significance. We can talk about, one term that I've recently come across is something called the spiritual commons. It's meaningful to me because the theoretical foundations of sustainability are based on the idea of the tragedy of the commons. Communities in a sustainable environment don't overexploit their natural environment that supports them. There are all sorts of ecological social mechanisms that do that from a utilitarian or biological perspective. But if we actually look at the way societies evolved and came together, there are lots of studies and interesting ways of looking at the way in which, early societies began to come together in groups, and how some of them evolved, some of them became hierarchical, and the way in which resources are distributed was highly unequal and powers are unequal. Some of these early communities, large urban communities, came together and they were very egalitarian. And likewise, ancient cultures, some of them were, small groups of apparently very simple approaches to hunter-gathering, but some of these groups also had very sophisticated networks across wide areas with even though they were distributed and they weren't agricultural or urban societies. So there are all sorts of complicated ways in which communities do organize themselves and organize the use of resources of their environment to support the community, the population of human beings. And one idea that I think is really key, which moves from a sort of utilitarian view of how organizers organize themselves, is to see how a lot of these communities came together around some kind of set of rituals that had spiritual significance from our point of view, but they would be very much embedded within the whole meaning of the process of life, the whole meaning of the way in which human beings lived in communities and how those communities lived in the culture, the communities lived within the natural environment. So, and these became religious systems, but from a sort of academic perspective, at least looking at how organizations work and how we exploit, in inverted commas, the environment, there's been this sort of Cartesian division between systems that organize us culturally in terms of spirituality and systems that organize us in terms of how we organize resources. And I think in the end, we need to shift towards a system of understanding meaning and purpose as something that is more spiritual in its nature from a modern word. I don't like the division between spiritual and mundane, but we need to shift from evaluating things from a, excuse me, from an accounting utilitarian approach to one that is based on, is this consistent with a set of, broadly speaking, transpersonal humanistic values. So that's why there isn't anything in it.
I can imagine it's a whole story. I'm thinking of the word interbeing that Thich Nhat Hanh is using often, and how we have built up our society now. I heard the word homo economics. That's also an interesting term, I think. Yeah. So thank you, Mark. Yeah.
Thank you for the question. It's a very significant one.
Mark, Katharina and I had already in the chat seen that we both wanted to ask a question. And as an anthropologist, I was looking at the word meaning, because when you look at the culture, the basics that we need to understand the culture is relatedness and language.
Yeah.
And relatedness in studying cultures is not only between people, but also the relationship to nature and to other beings, whether they be animated or unanimated. And language is the way to express that relatedness. And then the next step is to use that language to create a meaning that the whole culture will accept.
Yeah.
And when we talk about culture change, then we need a common meaning in order to be able to have a narrative that will be different from what we had before.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking the other day, talking to somebody about the program. Really, the program is a language course. It was built on the principles of teaching English as a foreign language. How do you teach a foreign language in that language to a group of non-English speakers? Now, in a way, that central space is left because I don't have a word for that I can use. I want to give people the building blocks to start to see the space where that word needs to go for that collective meaning of purpose, of life's richness, of interconnectedness, of compassion, of transience of the individual within this greater scheme of things. We don't have good words for it in a post-religious stage in our culture that we need to evolve.
What strikes me when we talk about this is how nicely this blends with what the Mindfulness Initiative has put down in the report Reconnected. Although some of it is more on the individual and relationship level, it is intended to support that groups take initiative, but I think that this is developed further. Can you say something where you see the connections between this approach and what the reconnection report encourages us to do?
Yes, the last two reports from the Mindfulness Initiative, I think, are key reports, and they're very closely related in many ways. The one before the reconnection report was Mindfulness Developing Agency in Urgent Times. Again, it's mostly talking about individual agency.
Yes.
And Jamie included my essay in the collection of essays in response to that. And the core of my response is, this is about individuals. As individuals, we have limited agency. It's as groups that we have collective agency, and really change can take place with groups. In fact, I'd say culturally, our disempowerment is to do with the construction of the individual as part of a meaning landscape of liberal economic systems, of democracy, of civil society, and the frameworks of that all being built around the notion of the individual. I think we've got to find a way of getting beyond that. Jamie's point was that, well, the evidence, there's not much evidence on the collective stuff. So I have to talk about the individual stuff. And I think I've briefly read, I mean, I must admit, not in depth, the reconnection report, but again, I think it's still talking about how this changes individual behaviors rather than looking at how this is impacting collective behaviors. And the whole purpose of MBOE program is to combine the individual with the relational with the collective as a combined process. So it's saying, it's explicit about the fact, yes, this can help you as an individual. It can develop your own ability to engage constructively and meaningfully in your life and have a positive impact. But until this becomes a community, a collective, that's going to be very limited. It's when it becomes a collective, when it has the capacity for culture change in an organization, and that then has a capacity for creating shifts within the societal level of meanings and behaviors, and a new collective direction, which is what we need to precipitate if we're going to deal with the kind of issues that we're facing today. We have to create a systemic, non-linear approach to thinking about how to achieve this. I mean, there we go. That's how I think about it.
Yeah, and I fully agree. We all know that people do behave differently in a group than when they are individuals. So
Yeah.
if we succeed in having that systemic level of involvement with each other, then we can really make changes. And that's why the 25% is so important.
Yeah. I'd love at some stage to invite Sherida has
Yes.
been working with me to.
Shall we, before we take questions, ask Sherida to talk a bit about your experience, and then maybe if you have questions, you can already give a short note in the chat, and we will let you in. So Sherida, please, you are implementing the program in your own environment. Please tell us about it.
Yes, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Katharina. So I've been guiding teams in organizations for quite some years as a business consultant, where I did quite some team coaching over the years. And due to COVID, or more or less the lockdowns as an effect of COVID, I noticed the past few years that more and more requests were coming in from organizations to help them with teams and employees to reconnect, because they kind of one of the effects of lockdowns, and a lot of organizations chose in that period to work from home, they lost the social connectivity in organizations, in organization contexts, and that that had quite some impact about members of teams didn't feel like they belonged anymore. And especially for new people coming into these teams, it was kind of difficult to get on board. So I noticed that more and more requests were coming in that regard. And also after the period of lockdowns, when kind of organizations were opening up again, I also noticed a shift where they were requesting more about coaching teams on how to reconnect in a hybrid work situation, where part of the week members of staff would work from home, and also in combination with working at the office. And then what would be the meaning or the reason to be in the office other than to have social connectivity and social connecting in teams? And so these are the questions and the requirements I noticed that were coming towards me due to COVID and after COVID. And that, in combination of my experience as a mindfulness teacher, I was intrigued with that, because I was teaching mindfulness in the workplace before, even before COVID. But what I was missing when I was teaching mindfulness in the workplace, it was more or less an MBSR teaching program in a work environment. And the approach in that was still about the individual and how that individual could deal with challenges in a work environment. Yeah. So when I came across the MBOE program, and especially when Mark named it Social Mindfulness, I was interested right away, because I felt like, oh my, this is what I was looking for. How can I teach mindfulness in an organization environment where it's about connectivity and reconnecting? And so I had contact with Mark, and we had various chats about how I could start a pilot group. So I've managed to teach the MBOE program for me, a pilot group. And this pilot group consists of employees that are working in the same organization, but they're not direct colleagues. So it's not a team. So culturally, they speak the same language, but they are not depending on each other to have like team results, or they don't work together from day-to-day basis. So this was interesting, how the effects of the MBOE program in this group. And we're now halfway the program, so I can't say too much about the effects in this group. But what I saw happened is that one of the, for me, interesting was that what language do we speak when we express ourselves? And is there in this organization room and space to say, oh, I need help, or I'm not feeling so well, or how can I connect with my colleagues when things are just not going so well with me, and that has an effect on my productivity in the work environment. Because the work environment, one of the key elements is that it's about results. It's about being there, delivering results. And because these members of staff felt disconnected from their colleagues, they find it very difficult to get a social connection with their colleagues, to be able to be there in that environment, to say, I need help with an aspect of work, or I feel it's difficult for me to do the things that are required to do. So yes, for me, this is very interesting. And what I noticed working with this program, that it is about language. It's about understanding how emotions appear in the body. And it's also about what do you see in emotional expression at another person? How does that appear? About facial expressions, which can be, you can kind of, sometimes it's also a difference in culture, where you see somebody is angry or somebody is sad, and you have an association from your cultural background what the emotional expression is. So, and especially when, what I find also interesting is, and how do we cope with that? How do we deal with that? How do you get into conversation with your colleague, like, you know, how are you doing? And is everything all right? Are there things, you know, in work that you need help with? And just the fact that there is space to ask, how are you? And find words to express yourselves, and also have a conversation with your colleague about that. That's what's so far so good. This is what the MBOE program brings for this group. It would be interesting for me to also start a second pilot where I can work with an existing team where people already know each other, and then see how that dynamic in that team works then with the program. But that's for a second pilot. Yeah. So far my experience with it.
Thank you. I'd love to just say how much how much I've enjoyed working with Sherida, and I hope you don't mind me saying, but you expressed how people really just engaged and enjoyed the first two classes, and the interest and the learning. You know, the first class is only asking people to do a 1-minute meditation practice, which is based on the 3-minute breathing space, but it's like, it's understanding why we're doing it, how emotional systems work, and understanding a little bit about how we create ideas about things. So it's putting all of those things together. And then the second is going a little bit more into detail about how we experience emotions in the body, and just with interesting interactive activities where we're learning to do that as a rationale, actually start to build body-based awareness in again, it's quite a short body scan, but it gives a rationale for why we need to reconnect with feelings in the body, and so people can see why they're doing that as a foundation, if you like, to understanding more about themselves and others. And the third class, you said, Sherida, people just didn't want to, everything came out. They were all talking about their experience, and it became quite, if you like, that's the objective of getting to a place where in the program where people feel allowed to start talking about what's really going on for them in a safe way. You know, it's not therapeutic. It's just, how do we start to talk about our own experience with each other? It doesn't, I think I'm also kind of a little bit, I find the whole idea of therapy a little bit problematic, because I think it's a failure of our culture that doesn't enable us to just talk about this stuff. That means that we have to separate our emotional lives from our functional lives. But just within the third class, on the third class, this all started to happen, and I thought that was really exciting to hear that.
Thank you, Mark. Sharita, would you also allow me to ask a question, or did you want
Yes, sure.
to respond? You wanted to respond to?
Well, what I wanted to respond to what Mark was saying, what happened in the third session exactly was that when it comes to in and work environment, that in this group, the safe space enabled employees to express the struggles that they have been experiencing with a manager, with a colleague, and the group really held each other to be able to express these struggles and connect as a group, to really reflect on these issues, these situations, but also to help each other and guide each other with examples of how to deal with it. And all I did at that moment, I would sit back and let it happen. I was just, I would just sit back and let it happen. And I also said to them afterwards, this is a great start for an in-company intervision group, where you as colleagues, and you're not team members, but you work at the same organization. This is such a good foundation to use the practice of the 3-step meditation, which is based on, the 3-minute breathing space, to do the check-in, and then see what appears, and then have a conversation with each other, between each other, and guide each other and help each other and reflect as, a group of members, of participants in this group, but in this organization. And then you can kind of hold each other to deal with the struggles that you're facing in the work environment. So that was wonderful.
Thank you.
Yes, Katharina, you had a question.
And thank you. You answered my question already, because what you just described was these people weren't even a team.
No.
So imagine what happens if people would be a team, or would already know each other and work together and start from that.
Yeah, that would be exciting to see, what then happens in the dynamic. Yeah.
Yes. Maybe just to throw this in for a moment, EAMBA recently changed its mission, and because we realized that this inner transformation that we are working on needed more. So now the mission is that we are developing mindfulness for inner and outer sustainability. And that in this discussion is really, really paramount. It's really relevant, because we are going there. And from all sides, there is information that society needs this, and also individual people need this, need reconnection, need inner and outer transformation, inner and outer sustainability. Angela, is it correct that I thought to see your hand raising?
No,
No? Okay.
thank you though.
Let's open up for more experiences or questions or ideas, suggestions. Stasi, you work in organizations as well. What resonates with you when you hear what Sharita said, what Mark introduced?
Oh, thanks, Katharina, for inviting me. And thank you, Mark and Sharita. Everything resonates. I don't know if you've seen my facial expression throughout all the evening, but I was, internally applauding each of these, the slides too, all the thoughts shared. And I've been working in the area of culture, intercultural communication. I've taught as well people in language, which is not their own, adults too. And I'm very much aware how much work and thought there needs to be, and awareness about your own processes in order to really be understood. When Mark mentioned about the language, I just remember the film, maybe you've seen that, The Arrival. It's a great approach on there of how humans can reach understanding with non-humans, so to say, visitors from another world. And that's possible, not only because of the language, but beyond it. And in terms of working in organizations, I want to say I'm happy to have one of my colleagues here who also teaches mindfulness, who has started that in the company that I just joined. So Nick Bird is here, and so we both are, I think, feeling inspired to apply what we learned today. Maybe Nick wants to say something, but thank you, well, Nick, for being here too.
No, that's well worded. I can't sort of add anything to that. I'm very inspired, is what I can say. Thank you. Take this on board both internally, but also potentially externally to the clients that we have. So,
wonderful.
Thank you, Mark.
Daniela had her hand up a minute ago, and Deirdre has her hand up as well. I noticed Daniela's hand first, but
okay. Yeah, thank you for recognizing and also for inspiring. Feels like coming home, because I left a huge organization because to bring change in the work culture. I experienced it on my own at SAP, that it's possible to build communities and to live it and to spread it and to share it and to speak the same language. So I know it's possible, and I see in many environments that's not lived yet. So lots to do. And I got very curious on your program, Mark, because I bought your book, but I haven't read it yet. Apologizes, and I'm a bit confused about, is it an 8-week program? Is it or is it a concept idea, or is it how it's practical? What's the approach in it? Because I'm experienced in Search Inside Yourself program. I'm a certified teacher in that, which is also building communities, but yeah, it's a different approach. And I'm coming also from geographic, so I studied organizational systems and ecosystems and how that interferes, so I got very curious about the program in itself. Is it an 8-week program or something else differently? This is one of my questions. The other one is, how many organizations have experienced your program, and how broad is it? Because it's recognized with EAMBA as MBP, but still it's not tangible for me. So maybe you can enlighten me in this.
To answer your first question, the initial trial was a 6-week course. I really evolved that out of the learnings I gained from developing and teaching the Frantic World course. I taught 30 of them to the largest veterinary providers of corporate providers of veterinary services, a number of programs to people in the community. I'm sure there were, it was a long time ago, I can't remember any other organizations, but that was the main thing. And then I taught the 6 programs to the NHS hospital, and we ran the trial. I've taught it to teams of collaborating teachers in collaborating schools, and I've delivered it in the community as an initiative to establish a community of practice in just 4 programs in the community. And the book itself is more of a collation of notes that emerged over the whole process of teaching the program. The initial supporting materials were in a much shorter format. They were in an app, and we decided to discontinue using the app, but we may build another app. There's another part of that app which is a specific, very nice little tool that is an interface where that has touch and breath, and it adapts as biofeedback in that is a very nice little thing that disrupts people's use of the phone, if you like, but that's kind of an added extra, and it didn't seem to have much impact in the trial. And then I've taught it as a whole organizational approach for the UK Green Building Society. The initial trialed program was 6 times 1 hour. The UK Green Building Council, it seemed to need at least an hour and a quarter to feel comfortable. In the community, people asked for an extra 15 minutes. It became an hour and a half. So there was more casual time beginning and the end, rather than, a kind of tight container of time, getting the program done and people moving back into their offices. The UK Green Building Council was done with a colleague or a friend that is a organizational development consultant, and we started that program with appreciative inquiry for every person in the organization. There were 25. It was a small organization, so it was a whole organizational thing. So that's quite a significant impact, or sort of resource to implement. We in the end did an hour and a half classes, and the first class was face-to-face, and then from then on we delivered it remotely, and that's a much more complicated process, and it takes a lot of organization to get to organize the breakout groups, to provide material for people to work with in breakout groups, etc. But it was done. Then we followed it up with a sort of what we called a green shoot survey, and then an action planning program. What we would offer following up from that, which I did in the hospital, was then workshops to sort of give people to develop individuals' ability to lead short guided mindfulness meditations to colleagues in teams, and what established out of that was you know, an informal group where NHS staff came to, I think it was weekly, but and I think a very big part of the impact of that in the hospital, again, we did about 10% of the whole staff, was the fact that there was a language that people started to talk about across the hospital. I think it was about 4 years later, I spoke to somebody involved with, you know, had a key role in organizing the whole program and set of programs and developing the idea and communicating with colleagues to get it into the hospital. And she said she felt that it had had a significant effect on the way the whole hospital dealt with lockdown and the pressures of COVID, even though it was only 10% of the staff that went through the program. Probably half of them were really kind of engaged in it. So just the fact that you're building that language, that it's part of the culture, has these systemic effects in the community. So that's all I've done as those are all the programs that I've actually taught. I mean, in terms of the MBOE program, it's sort of, I suppose that's about 15 programs. Oh, and I did one other which hasn't really worked, trying to chop it into 3 sessions online, and it wasn't set up well enough for a major corporate with a view to it being a pilot. There's discussion of taking that further into trying to find something that's more applicable to go across the whole organization, but it's stalled at the moment. So that's the only organizational experience that I've got. My organizational development colleague, who started off his career in McKinsey, and then moved towards the direction of Ashridge, he said it was the highlight of his career, what he saw happen in the way it developed conversations and people's understanding of each other in the organization. So now's the time to really go for dissemination. That's where we are. And I'm sure many of you will be much better at doing that than me.
Daniela, do you want to respond or continue? Or is that satisfying for you for this moment?
For the moment, it's fine. Thank you very much.
Yeah, for the moment.
Tangible. Yeah.
We will not be over today. No, no.
Huge topic.
There is a narrated and just a summary of the key, sort of a standardized version that there's a link to on my LinkedIn profile. It's not a public YouTube, but you can link to it from there, which just goes through a sort of standard version of the content that you're welcome to look at. Okay.
And then, Richard, do you want to share your experience now?
Okay, thank you, Katharina. Deirdre, it was Deirdre. Were you going to say something?
Oh, sorry. Of course.
I was, if that's okay. I have another meeting at 12:30, so if it's okay, I might ask my question now. That's all right. So I just bought your book, Mark, and looking forward to it arriving. And thank you, Sharita, as well. The distinction around the individual versus community has been really helpful in understanding what it takes change to happen. And I have 2 questions. One is the 25% that's needed as a tipping point for change when it comes to either organizations or community groups. Is it important or essential or irrelevant that the leadership is involved in that 25%, or does it matter? And then the second question is, one thing that's really hit me is the language, like learning a language in order to communicate and connect. And at the stage of promotion with the decision makers, and again, I'm kind of guessing there might be 2 bunches of decision makers, one who know nothing about mindfulness or are completely cynical, and then the other who might be, mindfulness advocates. And will there be, or is there already kind of guidance around what language to use in order to get decision makers maybe receptive and open to having an MBOE program run in their organization or their community group?
If there was two questions there, the first one slipped my mind, but the last one really is about how do you engage and talk about this with your decision makers. Oh, there were two questions, I remember. One is, does it matter if it's leadership involved? Well, you know, you've got to work with who's got power and influence in an organization. It's as simple as that. Yeah.
But I mean, in the participating, so let's say
Yeah.
the leaders say, yay, you know, you can come on in and do the MBOE. Is it important that of the 25% who are partaking, that there is the leadership partaking or not?
The more the, you know, that's a sociological question, but I mean, the simple fact is that leaders have more influence. But I'm not thinking of it. I'm thinking of this as an astructural approach. I'm thinking this as a group of people. Now, out of that, there are anthropological processes that produce influence. We happen to superimpose upon those organizational structures of responsibility and authority. Now, a lot of those are artificial and counter to natural emerging properties of leadership and trust. So yes, we need those people that can influence, that are important influences, and how those processes of influence arise are often in sort of existing linkages of connections with individuals in an organization, and often they are in positions of power, but not always, you know. And often the power structures are there trying to prevent those associations of power and influence emerging out of lower layers in an organization. I'm trying not to even go there with any of this. It's like, how do people relate to each other and self-organize? And that has to fit into the existing system. Yes, we've got to get influencers to buy into it. And in the end, an influencer is not going to, I mean, a leader, I'm going to call it, you know, someone that's got a leadership position in an organizational hierarchy. Often they're the problem, you know, because they think they know what they're doing, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And this is the fundamental human aspect of this, is discovering that we don't have answers. And the answers emerge out of recognizing that we are largely powerless, but something happens when we recognize our inability to do something. You know, something happens when we start to recognize our failings, if you like. And I mean, a fundamental principle, which I'm really excited about, is learning, is the skill of learning to listen to people describe their experience and notice the wish that we have, the urge that we have to put it in boxes and tell someone what they're experiencing. And then therefore say, you're experiencing this, and therefore the problem is that you need to do X, Y, and Z. And that is exactly what we've got to stop doing, I think.
Brilliant. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And Sharita, you wanted to react to this? And then I will also share something about group composition.
Yeah, so regarding, there is a question about whether for this, to run this program, how do you introduce this, right? And who, to decision makers who will, and usually that's leadership, and especially leadership who doesn't have anything with mindfulness. Like they're like, oh no, mindfulness, that's not really for us. So as a business consultant, my experience, I'm not saying this is how it is, but from my experience, leadership are not interested, oh, I want a mindfulness program in my organization. they have an issue, they have a problem, mostly result driven, that they want to improve. And they ask for advice from a consultant, help us improve this issue that we are experiencing in our organization, in our department, in our teams, to improve the results. Yes. And then I come in and I start collecting my information about what's going on. How about, for example, employee surveys, things like that. Because then it gives, and then I have interviews with, well, that's the way I work. And leadership is not interested in what method I use. They want the result. Yeah. So if I am able to connect with the result, and I I can run a training program for your staff that may or may not work for you to get these results, then I have them on board. And they are not interested that it's a mindfulness-based organizational education. They want the result. Yeah. And I know that the MBOE, for example, could be a program that could work really well to get those results. And that's how I approach it. And because I've had some experience in team coaching, I also am able to guide a team in an organization environment, because I understand what the challenges are for leadership and staff to connect with each other, to receive the goals. And it's always goal driven. It's always result driven. And that's what leadership is willing to invest financially to get somebody on board to help them. So that's, if it makes any sense. Yeah.
Thank you for answering the second question that I didn't address at all, but you did it much better, Sherida. And so the simple question is, it's a case by case. There are general sets of languages. I tried to present some of those in those slides. It depends who you're talking to and what they're interested in. And Sherida has done that, has far more knowledge of that process than I do.
Yeah, and what I can add to that, mostly I'm approached by HR advisors or HR managers who say, I see an issue with, let's say, a manager or in a team or a part of the organization, and I'm looking at ways or who can come in to help us with this issue. And a lot of times, what Mark already expressed, it's the lack of leadership that causes disconnection in teams. Yeah. So that's what I wanted to add, and I'll put a stop. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
There's one more thing that I'd like to add, and that is that there's an initiative that was launched in Oxford in July called the World Wellbeing Movement. And they are developing a metric for corporates, for corporate well-being. Now, part of the problem is that C-suite boards, what does well-being mean to them as something that they can put numbers and value on? So this metric will feed into ESG, which is environment, social, and governance reporting, that will feed into sustainability, UN sustainability goals. And it's those ESGs that are fed into share value. So if they see a low metric in well-being, they'll go, that's a lot of money. So if you like, I hope that we are in a position where I can start to support a number of practitioners that can practice developing their experience, developing their skills, workplace practitioners, however they describe themselves, consultants, and it's more of an organizational place than it is a training model that we're talking about, more of a consultants model than a training model, but there's no clear boundary between the two. that can be ready to answer that demand as it arises when this wellbeing metric becomes adopted. Now, there are something like 15 or 20 big organizations associated with this world well-being movement. So it's really, you know, it's not that it's the first well-being metric ever being created. It's one that's being created with international significant corporate buy-in.
Wow, very interesting. Thank you so much. Tonight has been really interesting, and thanks for all the work you're doing. Lovely. Thanks, Katharina, as well, and EAMBA. I have to go now.
The things that I would like to add is you just said case by case, Mark, and I offer a program where I integrate mindfulness in my Vitality program. And I have the experience that we cannot generalize that leadership is not interested. On the contrary, I think that about half of the ones that buy my program are interested themselves, and they've come to it by following an individual course. And then, and I heard leadership say this, I want to grant this benefit to my people. I have benefited so much. I want my team, I want my organization to have the same benefits. So, for example, last year I worked with a PR and communication company. The CEO, he initiated the program, and then we had a lunch program and an evening program, and he participated in the lunch program, and the CFO participated in the evening program. And they were both very humble and very not dominating, which is the totally important when there is a mixture of hierarchy in one group. In comparison, I had 2 years ago, I had a bank where also, and again, it was this, in that case, it was the CFO who bought it. He participated in the group and he asked other leaders to participate in the other groups. They were the first to drop out. And the group in which he participated had the best results. So it depends on the leadership culture and the attitude of the people who are in the more powerful in the hierarchy, whether it is helpful or not. And I think that as consultants in our first round of having interviews and of understanding with which organization we are working, we must come with an advice of whether to mix hierarchies or not, because it can backfire if you have a composition of a group that would not be helpful. If people are forced to participate, or if they are ashamed, or if they don't want to open up. So it's a responsibility, not only for the buyer, but also for the supplier to understand the culture and to give an informed advice on how to compose the group. And only then can we make generalizations. I think there are many leaders already who are, look, for example, Jeff Weiner at LinkedIn. I mean, he's one of the big advocates of people taking time. He's offering possibilities at his venue. And we have these kind of people in the Netherlands and also in Belgium where I work. So they are there. It's starting. I think, Daniela, did you not, or did you raise your hand? Okay. Richard, we kept you waiting, please.
Thank you. Yeah, Mark, I haven't done an MBOE course, but I've read your book. And it just strikes me as such an elegant sort of integration of secular mindfulness and sort of Dharma fundamentals. I've been involved in sort of secular mindfulness programs and separately Buddhist groups for a good while now. And one of the things that seems to come up very, very regularly with people that I know who are running, particularly MBCT courses or MBSR courses, particularly MBCT actually, is this experience of there not being any time for kind of relationality, really, which is sort of ridiculous, really. That there's such a insistence on prosecuting a program, particularly with trainees. You know, I'm talking about supervisees, people learning to do this for the first time, often very anxious about getting through the material and pushing people through the material. And I hear a lot of people talk about this. It's kind of it doesn't feel right. It's sort of almost a bit inhumane, really. And it just strikes me as a shame that MBOE or something similar wasn't around 20 years ago, because there is this situation where mindfulness often means, I'm being a bit sort of blunt here, but being pushed through a skills training program. So what happens in my experience, some other people's as well, is we end up rebelling against this system, even though we feel policed. You know, we have to use the language of running enhanced mindfulness programs, and you know, kind of and maybe being challenged about going off script and all of that. And it sort of strikes me as that it's a problem, like a kind of political problem in the secular mindfulness world. And I don't know if there's a question in there or if anything resonates there. I suppose the question would be what is to be done, that good old one.
Well, I hear you, and the simple fact is that I've been in a position which has been challenging what you're describing for more than 10 years. Any system, any professionalization, and we could, wherever we look at this, that people build a sense of identity and power within those systems, and just because it happens to be mindfulness makes no difference. And but there are aspects of the emergence of what we understand of mindfulness that have particular issues to do with not questioning the way it's done, that have all sorts of historical causes that have brought rise to that. And so the question is, you know, what do you do about it? I mean, I think generally speaking, you don't need to do that work. I've done that work, and forget it is the simple thing. Get on with the job. If this is what you want to do, or something else, get on with it. There's something else that is specific to point out to the MBOE program, and what is really, I think, an indication of a revolution taking place in the mindfulness world, and that is the acknowledgement of the MBOE program. There was a need for it, and there was a desire to find a program that would sustain the inquiry from the establishment as to what made a valid short program. And it was used as a pilot to examine the content. You know, it's pretty good. There's very few programs out there that of any kind that have got the level of evidence that supports this program. It's not to the class of a randomized controlled trial with a triage collection of people with a particular diagnosis, but that's hugely limited in its application. This has been tried in the real world and come out with real results. so far as can be made within a population, within a hospital of working people. So, and I mean, you could look at consultancies and offerings of management interventions, organizational interventions, and I think you would find few that compare with that. And that was the level that the international collaboration of the Dutch mindfulness teachers organization and the British EAMBA needed to be able to rationalize and justify building a new class of short mindfulness programs. They've created a class called moderated low dose mindfulness-based program and recognized MBOE as a moderated low dose mindfulness-based program, or at least they've recognized the curriculum. We've yet got to get to a place where it is a fully recognized, because to do that, we need to have further dissemination, further studies, further teachers. You know, it has to be not just me and what I did. It has to be other people repeating the program to demonstrate that it's repeatable and scalable. And we have to build an approach to teaching this program in the same way that MBCT has built a set of training modules and approaches that have been recognized to disseminate it and develop teachers. So that's the whole next step, and that's what I'm really talking about here, and that's where we're going. That's where we are. That's the work that I'm doing at the moment. It's not up to me to now go and teach more courses. It's to support others to do this. And what does a moderated low dose mean? Low dose mindfulness-based program. It means that the mindfulness practice, the benefits of that practice are affected by other factors in the program. So I've as I mentioned with that that Venn diagram, I've changed the weighting of those three circles from it all being about, or 90% of it being about the red circle, mindfulness practice, to making that part maybe 15-20% of, and the other two circles being more important. And actually, from a Dharma perspective, that's much more traditional. It's much more authentic to the way in which the Dharma is taught. So, and it's much more human, I think. And it's supported by the notion of community, which again is fundamental to contemplative practice in any tradition. So, you know, I would say that it's an interactive set of functions, as from, you know, most people involved with understand, you know, with a background in Buddhism would acknowledge that the Eightfold Path is a series of interactive elements. It's not all about it, but from the existing view, we have to talk about mindfulness being this, mindfulness meditation being the central element that is mediating all the benefits. That's all. So it's just a game of language in the end for people to be able to feel comfortable about letting go of a sets of assumptions that they've deeply identified with, in order to in which they have encountered this aspect of contemplative practice, and it's brought them so much benefit. So it's a transformative thing. It could never have happened 20 years ago. It can only happen when it happens, and it's happening now. And I just happen to have been a bit of a rebel and not liked what I saw, and had the opportunities to see deeply enough what was going on to be able to say, I want to do something differently and swim against the stream.
And here you have a great definition of culture.
Yeah.
That we together assume something and become so deeply in love with it that we don't want to change it, even if it hurts. And yes, thank you, Mark. We've also come full circle to the cover of your book, I Relate, Therefore I Am. Wonderful. And so many new things have been raised, among others, the question of how we define evidence-based programs and how we collect the evidence, How is that done? And how do we know that that is evidence? It's a big question that, well, please, colleagues, come back. Mark, join us for that discussion, because that's not over yet. Let's open for one more question or remark and then not stretch it further. Thank you so much. Who would like to make a last question or remark concerning this theme for today? Because this discussion, this dialogue is not over. Well, we only get thank yous, Mark, in the chats. So also a thank you from me and from EAMBA. One of the things that I also want to say is there is this wonderful saying of, dear friend, I write you a long letter because I don't have time for a short one. I so much enjoyed that you put in the time to make this book so essential in such a short format that it is possible for all of us to read it in a very short time and then take time to read it again and again to let it sink in. And if anyone here is willing to help, we would like to make a translation available in as many languages as possible for the EAMBA community. So if one of you would like to help with this, we are now working, the Italian translation is ready and published. The French translation is ready, but not yet published. The Arabic translation is in becoming, and we are working on Dutch and German. So if any one of you would like to help for Bulgaria, for Serbia, what other languages do we have? Do we have French? Do we have German? Please send a message to EAMBA and let's make this happen. Thank you very much, Mark, for being here. And please come back, because we are going to develop this further.
Thank you so much.
And thank you, Sharida, for sharing your experience and for doing the pilot. We would love to hear more about it.
Thank you.
Goodbye, dear friends. Let's say goodbye the way we just started creating this. Remember? Very difficult for me. Yeah. Good night. See you soon.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, nice that you hang on, Sharida and Mark.
So thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you.
The recording is still on, Katharina.
Do you want to